The knife trembled in Elena's hand as she stared across the white tablecloth at the man who owned half of Silicon Valley. Alexander Reed sat perfectly still, his gray eyes locked on hers, waiting for an answer to the question that had just shattered everything she thought she knew about this arrangement. The expensive restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation around them, but Elena felt like she was drowning in silence. "I asked you a simple question," Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's your daughter's name?" Elena's breath caught. In 6 weeks of playing his fake girlfriend, attending his business dinners, and smiling for cameras at charity events, she had never once mentioned Sophia. She had been so careful, so perfect in her role as the mysterious woman who had captured the heart of America's most eligible bachelor. But now, with those 3 words, her entire world was crashing down. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, but her voice cracked on the lie. Alexander leaned forward, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her stomach twist with fear. Not anger, not betrayal, something worse. Disappointment. "Elena, I've known about Sophia for 2 weeks. I've known about the medical bills, the late rent notices, the reason you really answered my ad. What I don't understand is why you're still lying to me." The crystal water glass slipped from Elena's other hand, shattering against the marble floor. Heads turned their way, but Elena barely noticed. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and with it, her last hope of saving her daughter's life. "How?" The word came out as barely a breath. "Does it matter?" Alexander's voice was gentle now, which somehow made everything worse. "What matters is that you've been sitting across from me for 6 weeks, letting me fall for a woman who doesn't exist." Elena felt tears burning her eyes. She had known this moment would come eventually. She had prepared for his anger, his disgust when he learned the truth about who she really was. But she hadn't prepared for the way he was looking at her now, like she had broken something precious that could never be fixed. "You don't understand," she whispered, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "What? You never meant to lie to me every single day? You never meant to let me believe you actually cared about me?" Alexander's composure finally cracked, and Elena heard the pain beneath his controlled exterior. "I do care about you." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "That's the problem. I wasn't supposed to care about you." Alexander stared at her, and for a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded away. Elena saw confusion flicker across his features, followed by something that might have been hope. But then his expression hardened again. "Tell me about Sophia," he said quietly. "Tell me about your daughter, Elena. And this time, don't lie to me." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the last of her strength drain away. She had fought so hard to keep her 2 worlds separate, to protect both Alexander and Sophia from the mess of her life. But now, sitting in this restaurant that cost more per meal than she made in a month, she realized she had been fooling herself from the very beginning. "She's 7, Elena said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "And she's dying." The words hung between them like a physical thing. Alexander's face went completely still, and Elena saw the exact moment when he understood why she had taken his money, why she had agreed to this insane arrangement, why she had been willing to lie to him every single day for 6 weeks. "Her heart," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger now that the truth was finally out. "She needs surgery that costs more money than I could make in 5 years. The doctors say she has maybe 6 months without it." Alexander didn't speak for a long moment. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant dance of wealth and privilege, but their corner table had become an island of raw honesty in a sea of pretense. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he finally asked. "When I first interviewed you, when you answered my ad for a fake girlfriend, why didn't you just explain what you needed the money for?" Elena let out a bitter laugh. "Because rich men don't hire poor single mothers to be their fake girlfriends, Alexander. They hire mysterious, available women with no complications. I gave you what you wanted." "What I wanted," Alexander repeated slowly as if tasting the words. "Do you have any idea what I actually wanted, Elena?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I wanted someone real," he said, his gray eyes intense. "I wanted someone who wouldn't see dollar signs when they looked at me. Someone who might actually care about Alexander Reed the person, not Alexander Reed the bank account." "I do care about you," Elena said again, and this time she didn't try to hide the emotion in her voice. "More than I should. More than I ever meant to." Alexander reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of hers. "Then why does it feel like I don't know you at all?" Elena stared at his hand, so close she could feel the warmth of his skin. 6 weeks ago she had shaken that same hand in his office, agreeing to the most ridiculous contract she had ever heard of. $50,000 to pretend to be his girlfriend for 6 months. No physical contact beyond what was necessary for public appearances. No personal questions. No getting emotionally involved. She had broken every single rule. "Because you don't know me," she whispered. "The woman you've been falling for, she doesn't exist. She's just a character I've been playing." "Is she?" Alexander's voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear him. "When you laugh at my terrible jokes, is that fake? When you argue with me about books, or when you insist on learning everyone's name at these events, is all of that just an act?" Elena felt fresh tears threatening. "No," she admitted. "That's all real. That's all me." "Then maybe," Alexander said, finally closing the distance between them and taking her hand, "you should tell me who you really are." Elena looked down at their joined hands, his pale and soft from a life of luxury, hers darker and marked with small scars from years of hard work. The contrast should have reminded her of all the reasons this could never work. Instead, it just reminded her of how perfectly they fit together. "My name is Elena Rodriguez," she began, her voice barely steady. "I'm 28 years old. I work 3 jobs: housekeeping at a hotel downtown, weekend shifts at a diner, and I tutor kids in math when I can find the clients. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Oakland with my daughter Sophia, who is the smartest, funniest, bravest person I've ever known. And she's going to die if I can't find a way to pay for her surgery." Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "What else?" "I haven't been on a real date in 3 years because I don't have time for relationships. I read romance novels when I can't sleep because they help me believe that happy endings exist somewhere, even if not for people like me. I make the world's worst coffee but somehow excellent pancakes. And," she took a shaky breath, "I think I might be falling in love with you, which is the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Elena waited for Alexander to let go of her hand, to stand up and walk away from the mess of her life. Instead, he tightened his grip. "Elena Rodriguez," he said, as if testing the weight of her real name. "It's nice to finally meet you." Elena stared at him, confusion and hope warring in her chest. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm furious," Alexander said, but his voice was gentle. "But not at you. I'm angry at a world that would put a mother in the position of having to lie and pretend just to save her child's life. I'm angry at myself for creating a situation where you felt like you had to hide the most important part of who you are." "Alexander, But most of all," he continued, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, "I'm angry that you thought I wouldn't help you if you had just told me the truth from the beginning." Elena felt something break open in her chest, a knot of fear and shame she had been carrying for months. "You would have helped me? A complete stranger?" "Elena," Alexander said, his gray eyes serious, "I've been looking for someone real my entire life. Do you really think I would have turned away the first genuine person I'd met in years just because she had problems?" Elena couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. 6 weeks ago, she had walked into Alexander Reed's office prepared to sell a piece of her soul to save her daughter. She had never expected to find something that felt like love hiding in the shadows of a business transaction. "So what happens now?" she finally managed to ask. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Around them, the restaurant continued its expensive dance, but Elena felt like they were the only 2 people in the world. "Now," Alexander said slowly, "you tell me everything. Not because I'm paying you to, but because I care about you. The real you. And then we figure out how to save Sophia's life." Elena felt the last of her walls crumble. "And us? What happens to us?" Alexander smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him all evening. "That depends on whether Elena Rodriguez might be interested in getting to know Alexander Reed. The real Alexander Reed, not the billionaire everyone else sees." "I'd like that," Elena whispered. "Good," Alexander said, signaling for the check. Because this fake relationship was getting a little too real for comfort anyway. Elena laughed despite her tears, and for the first time in months she felt like she could breathe again. The truth was out and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it might just be beginning. 3 months earlier, Elena Rodriguez had been standing outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Reed Technologies, clutching a crumpled newspaper ad in her sweating palm. The ad had been ridiculous, seeking intelligent, attractive woman for temporary companionship arrangement. Discretion required. Compensation generous. She had circled it with a red pen during her lunch break at the hotel, thinking it was probably a scam or worse. But Sophia's medical bills were piling up faster than Elena could pay them, and desperation had a way of making even the most ridiculous options seem reasonable. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like it lasted hours. Elena had borrowed a dress from her friend Carmen, a simple black number that was probably more expensive than anything Elena had ever owned. She had practiced her story in the mirror that morning: mysterious background, no family complications, available for 6 months of fake dating. She had never mentioned having a daughter. Alexander Reed's office was bigger than Elena's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the San Francisco Bay that probably cost more per square foot than most people made in a year. But what struck Elena most was how alone Alexander looked behind his massive desk, surrounded by all that expensive emptiness. "Ms. Martinez," he had said, standing to greet her. Elena hadn't corrected the name; she had given a fake one when she called, another lie to add to the pile she was building. "Mr. Reed," she had replied, shaking his hand and trying not to think about how warm his fingers felt against hers. Alexander Reed was not what Elena had expected. The photos and magazines made him look cold and calculating, but in person he just looked tired. His gray eyes held a sadness that no amount of money could fix, and Elena found herself wondering what had driven a man who could have anyone to place an ad for fake companionship. "Please sit," he had said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "I assume you have questions about the arrangement." Elena had nodded, trying to look composed while her heart hammered against her ribs. The ad was vague. Alexander had smiled then, the first genuine expression she had seen from him. Intentionally so. "The truth is, Ms. Martinez, I need someone to accompany me to social events for the next 6 months. Business dinners, charity galas, that sort of thing. The press has been particularly interested in my personal life lately, and I find their attention distracting." "So you want to hire a fake girlfriend?" "I want to hire someone to play a role," Alexander had corrected. "Someone intelligent enough to hold conversations with business associates, poised enough to handle social situations, and professional enough to maintain appropriate boundaries." Elena had studied his face, looking for signs of the predator she had half expected to find. Instead, she saw only exhaustion and a loneliness that matched her own. "What kind of boundaries?" she had asked. "No physical intimacy beyond what's necessary for public appearances. Hand-holding, perhaps an arm around your waist at events. Nothing more. No personal questions about each other's lives outside of this arrangement. And absolutely no emotional involvement." The last rule had seemed the easiest to follow at the time. "The compensation," Alexander had continued, "would be $50,000. Half paid up front, half at the completion of the 6-month contract." Elena had tried to keep her expression neutral, but $50,000 was more money than she had ever seen in one place. It was enough to pay for Sophia's surgery with money left over for her recovery care. "Why me?" she had asked. "I'm sure you had other applicants." Alexander had been quiet for a moment, his gray eyes studying her face. "You're the first person who's walked into this office and looked at me like I'm a human being instead of a bank account," he had said finally. "That's refreshing." Elena had felt a stab of guilt at his words, knowing that she was absolutely looking at him like a bank account. But there had been something else too. Something in the way he carried himself that suggested he understood loneliness the way she did. "If I agree to this," she had said carefully, "what exactly would be expected of me?" "Attend events with me. Make conversation. Smile for cameras. Let people believe we're together." Alexander had leaned back in his chair. "Think of it as acting. You'd be playing the role of my girlfriend for 6 months. And after 6 months? We part ways. No contact, no complications. A clean break." Elena had nodded, though something about the phrase "clean break" had made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't understood then. "I'll need some time to think about it," she had said. "Of course. But I'll need an answer by tomorrow. My first event is this weekend." Elena had stood to leave, Alexander's business card burning in her palm like a promise or a threat. At the door she had turned back. "Can I ask why you don't just date someone for real?" Alexander's expression had shuddered, returning to the cold mask she recognized from magazine photos. "Because real relationships require trust, Ms. Martinez. And trust is a luxury I can't afford." Elena had nodded and left, but his words had stayed with her during the long bus ride home to Oakland. She had found Sophia curled up on their tiny couch, homework spread across the coffee table, oxygen tank humming quietly beside her. "How was school, baby?" Elena had asked, settling beside her daughter and helping with math problems. "Good," Sophia had said, but Elena could see the exhaustion in her brown eyes. The little girl's lips had a blue tinge that hadn't been there a month ago, and Elena knew they were running out of time. That night, after Sophia had gone to sleep, Elena had sat at their kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and Alexander Reed's business card. $50,000. Enough to save her daughter's life. All she had to do was pretend to love a man who didn't believe in real love anyway. She had called him the next morning and accepted the job. The first few weeks had been easier than Elena had expected. Alexander was a perfect gentleman, never pushing boundaries or making her uncomfortable. He had introduced her to his world of expensive restaurants and charity galas, teaching her which fork to use and how to make small talk with people who own small countries. Elena had been surprised to discover that she actually enjoyed his company. Alexander was intelligent and well-read, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. He treated everyone around him with respect, from the CEO of major corporations to the waitstaff at restaurants. Elena found herself looking forward to their fake dates, forgetting sometimes that she was being paid to be there. The problems had started when she began to care. It was little things at first. The way Alexander's shoulders relaxed when he laughed at something she said. How he always made sure she was comfortable before ordering at restaurants. The protective way he guided her through crowds at events, his hand gentle but firm on her back. Elena had started paying attention to the sadness in his gray eyes, wondering what had put it there. She had begun to notice how isolated he seemed despite being surrounded by people at every event. And slowly, against every rule they had established, she had started to fall for the man behind the billionaire facade. The worst part was that she suspected he was falling for her too, or at least for the version of her he thought he knew. Elena Martinez, the mysterious woman with no complications and no past. Not Elena Rodriguez, the struggling single mother with a dying daughter and more problems than any wealthy man would want to deal with. 6 weeks into their arrangement, Elena had been living 2 completely separate lives. During the day she was still Elena Rodriguez, cleaning hotel rooms and serving coffee and praying that Sophia's condition wouldn't worsen before the contract ended. 3 evenings a week she transformed into Elena Martinez, the sophisticated woman who belonged on Alexander Reed's arm. The 2 worlds had felt impossible to reconcile until the night Alexander had looked across that restaurant table and asked about Sophia. In that moment, Elena had realized that all her careful planning and protective lies had been for nothing. She had fallen in love with Alexander Reed, and he had fallen in love with a woman who didn't exist. Now, sitting in that same restaurant with her real name finally spoken aloud between them, Elena wondered if there was any way to bridge the gap between who she really was and who she had pretended to be. Alexander claimed he wanted to know the real her, but Elena wasn't sure the real her was someone a billionaire could love. After all, Elena Rodriguez came with complications that Elena Martinez never had. A sick daughter, crushing debt, a life full of struggle and sacrifice. These weren't things that disappeared just because someone was willing to write a check. But as Alexander helped her into his car that night, his hand warm and steady on her elbow, Elena found herself hoping that maybe, just maybe, love could be stronger than the lies that had brought them together. The first charity gala had been a disaster waiting to happen. Elena stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hotel room Alexander had booked for her, staring at a woman she barely recognized. The dress was beautiful, deep emerald silk that complemented her skin tone perfectly, but it cost more than she made in 3 months. The shoes were torture devices disguised as fashion, and the jewelry was borrowed from Alexander's personal shopper. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "It's just acting. You're playing a part." But as the elevator carried her down to the hotel lobby where Alexander was waiting, Elena felt like she was drowning in her own lies. She had spent the morning researching the other guests, memorizing names and faces and trying to prepare for conversations about art and politics and business deals worth more than most people's homes. Alexander was standing by the elevator when the doors opened, and Elena's breath caught at the sight of him in his tuxedo. He looked every inch the billionaire prince the media made him out to be, but when he smiled at her, she saw a flash of the lonely man from his office. "You look beautiful," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you," Elena replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. The gala was being held at the Museum of Modern Art, and Elena had never seen anything like it. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across marble floors, and servers in white gloves carried champagne that probably cost more per glass than Elena's hourly wage. Everyone looked like they had stepped out of a magazine, beautiful and polished and completely comfortable in their wealth. Elena felt like an imposter from the moment they walked in. "Remember," Alexander murmured in her ear as they approached the first group of guests, "you're a consultant from New York. Art history background. We met at a gallery opening 6 months ago." Elena nodded, plastering on her practiced smile as Alexander made introductions. The first few conversations were easier than she had expected. The other guests were more interested in talking about themselves than asking probing questions about her background. But as the evening wore on, Elena found herself struggling to keep track of all the details she had invented about her fake life. "So what's your specialty in art history?" a woman named Victoria asked during dinner. She was the wife of a tech executive, dripping in diamonds and clearly suspicious of Elena's vague answers about her work. "Contemporary American pieces," Elena replied, hoping she sounded confident. "Particularly post-war abstract expressionism." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "How fascinating. What did you think of the Rothko retrospective at SFMOMA last spring?" Elena's mouth went dry. She had no idea if there had been a Rothko retrospective or what she was supposed to think about it. "It was moving," she said weakly. "Really?" Victoria's smile turned predatory. "I'm surprised to hear that, considering it was cancelled due to loan issues." Elena felt heat flood her cheeks. Around the table, other guests had started paying attention to their conversation, sensing drama like sharks sensing blood in the water. "You must be thinking of a different exhibition," Alexander said smoothly, his hand finding Elena's under the table. "Elena and I were in Europe last spring. Weren't we, darling?" Elena nodded gratefully, but she could see Victoria filing away the inconsistency for future use. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of careful conversation and growing anxiety. Elena felt like she was walking a tightrope, one wrong word away from exposing herself as a fraud. Later, during the dancing portion of the evening, Alexander pulled her onto the floor and into his arms. "You're trembling," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "I don't belong here," Elena whispered back. "These people can tell I'm not one of them." "These people are mostly bored and looking for entertainment," Alexander replied. "Victoria Palmer has been trying to catch someone in a lie for 20 years. Don't take it personally." But Elena did take it personally. Because it wasn't really a lie Victoria had caught her in, it was the truth. Elena didn't belong in this world of casual luxury and inherited wealth. She was a fake, a pretender, and eventually everyone would figure it out. "I should go," she said, pulling back to look at Alexander's face. This was a mistake. "Elena, wait." But she was already walking away, leaving Alexander standing alone on the dance floor. Elena made it to the ladies' room before the tears started, locking herself in a stall and trying to breathe through the panic attack building in her chest. She had been so stupid to think she could pull this off. These people lived in a different universe from hers, one where art history degrees and European vacations were normal topics of conversation. Elena's world was overtime shifts and medical bills and choosing between groceries and utilities. She couldn't fake her way through 6 months of this. "Are you all right, dear?" Elena looked up to find an elderly woman standing outside her stall, concern written across her lined face. She was elegant in the way that only came with decades of wealth, but her eyes were kind. "I'm fine," Elena said, wiping her face with toilet paper. "Just needed a moment." "These events can be overwhelming," the woman said gently. "I'm Margaret Chin. I don't think we've been introduced." Elena recognized the name. Margaret Chin was a major philanthropist and one of Alexander's biggest investors. "Elena Martinez," she said, hoping her voice didn't shake. "Ah, Alexander's young lady. He speaks of you often in our business meetings." Elena felt her stomach clench. "He does." "Oh yes. He's quite taken with you, though I suspect he's trying not to be." Margaret smiled. "Alexander has been hurt before, you know. He doesn't trust easily." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "But you seem different from his usual companions," Margaret continued. "More genuine. Less interested in his bank account than in his conversation." If only she knew, Elena thought miserably. "The thing about these events," Margaret said, settling onto one of the velvet chairs by the mirror, "is that half the people here are pretending to be something they're not. Old money pretending they earned it, new money pretending they've always had it, politicians pretending they care about art. The key is remembering that authenticity is rarer than diamonds in places like this." Elena stared at the older woman, wondering if Margaret somehow knew the truth about her. "Be yourself, dear," Margaret said, standing to leave. "Alexander is intelligent enough to see through pretense, but lonely enough to value the real thing when he finds it." Elena spent a long time in that bathroom thinking about Margaret's words. When she finally emerged, she found Alexander waiting for her in the hallway, worry etched across his features. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I was starting to think you'd climbed out a window." "I considered it," Elena admitted. Alexander's mouth quirked upward. Victoria Palmer has that effect on people. She once reduced a federal judge to tears at a dinner party. Despite herself, Elena smiled. Really? Really? She asked him about a case that had been sealed by the court, and when he couldn't answer, she accused him of being unprepared for intelligent conversation. Elena laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. She's terrifying. She's lonely, Alexander said simply. Rich, powerful people often are. It makes them cruel sometimes. Elena studied his face, hearing something personal in his words. Is that what made you cruel? Alexander was quiet for a moment. I'm not sure I was ever cruel. Just careful. Distant. It's easier than risking disappointment. Is that why you hired me? Elena asked. Because I'm safe? Because you don't have to risk anything real with me? Alexander's gray eyes met hers, and Elena saw something flicker there that made her breath catch. That was the plan, he said quietly. But plans don't always work out the way we expect. They stood there in the hallway, surrounded by the sounds of the gala continuing without them, and Elena felt the walls she had built around her heart start to crack. She was supposed to be playing a part, earning money to save her daughter's life. She wasn't supposed to care about the loneliness in Alexander's eyes or the way he made her feel like she was worth something. We should go back, she said finally. People will notice we're gone. Let them notice, Alexander replied, but he offered her his arm anyway. The rest of the evening passed more smoothly. Elena found that if she focused on listening rather than talking, she could navigate conversations without revealing too much about herself. And whenever someone asked a question she couldn't answer, Alexander was there with a smooth deflection or change of subject. By the time they left the museum, Elena was exhausted but oddly exhilarated. She had survived her first test, even if it hadn't been graceful. You did well tonight, Alexander said as his driver pulled up to the curb. I almost ran away twice and got caught in a lie about art exhibitions, Elena replied. That's doing well? You stayed, Alexander said simply. And you were yourself, not who you thought these people wanted you to be. That's rarer than you might think. Elena thought about Margaret Chen's words about authenticity being rarer than diamonds. If only Alexander knew how much she was hiding from him, how little of herself she was actually showing. Thank you, she said as the car pulled up to her hotel. For tonight. For covering for me with Victoria. We're a team, Alexander replied. That's how this works. But as Elena rode the elevator up to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were becoming something more complicated than a team. The contract between them was supposed to be simple, 6 months of fake dating for $50,000. No emotional involvement, no personal questions, no complications. Elena was starting to realize that the most dangerous lies weren't the ones she told Alexander about her background. The most dangerous lies were the ones she was telling herself about why her heart raced when he smiled at her, or why she found herself looking forward to their fake dates more than anything else in her real life. She was falling for him, and that hadn't been part of the plan at all. By the 4th week of their arrangement, Elena had developed a routine that felt like living 2 separate lives. Monday, Wednesday and Friday evenings belonged to Alexander Reed and the glittering world of San Francisco high society. The rest of her time belonged to reality, cleaning hotel rooms, serving coffee, and sitting beside Sophia's hospital bed during increasingly frequent doctor visits. The hardest part wasn't keeping track of her lies anymore. The hardest part was coming home to her real life after spending an evening in Alexander's world, seeing the contrast between the luxury she pretended to belong to and the struggles she actually lived with. Elena was wiping down tables at the diner where she worked weekend shifts when her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Emergency business dinner tonight. Can you be ready in 2 hours? Elena stared at the message, exhaustion weighing down her shoulders. She had been on her feet for 8 hours, and Sophia had a doctor's appointment in the morning that Elena couldn't afford to miss. But $50,000 meant saying yes even when every part of her wanted to go home and sleep. Of course, she texted back. Send me the details. 2 hours later, Elena was standing in front of another expensive restaurant, this time wearing a navy blue dress that Alexander's shopper had delivered to her apartment. She had managed a quick shower and some makeup, but she could feel the tiredness in her bones. Alexander was waiting for her at the bar, and Elena was struck again by how handsome he looked in his perfectly tailored suits. But tonight, she noticed something else. He looked tired too, shadows under his gray eyes that hadn't been there the week before. Thank you for coming on such short notice, he said, standing to greet her. I know it's not ideal. It's fine, Elena replied, accepting the glass of wine he offered. What's the occasion? Potential investors from Japan. They're only in town for tonight, and they specifically requested to meet you. Alexander's expression was apologetic. They read about us in the society pages last week. Elena nodded, steeling herself for another evening of careful conversation and practiced smiles. But as they walked toward their table, Alexander caught her arm gently. "Are you all right?" he asked, studying her face. "You look exhausted." Elena felt a stab of panic. She had been so careful to never let her real life show during their fake dates. "I'm fine. Just a long day." But Alexander didn't look convinced. Throughout dinner, Elena caught him watching her with concern, especially when she struggled to follow the complex business discussion between him and the Japanese investors. By the time dessert arrived, she could barely keep her eyes open. "Excuse me for just a moment," Alexander said to their guests, then stood and offered Elena his hand. "Could I speak with you privately?" Elena followed him to a quiet corner of the restaurant, her heart hammering with anxiety. Had she blown their cover? Said something wrong? Failed to play her part convincingly enough? "Elena, what's going on?" Alexander asked quietly. "And don't tell me you're fine. You've been distracted all evening, and you look like you haven't slept in days." Elena opened her mouth to lie, to give him some story about work stress or family obligations that would explain her exhaustion without revealing the truth. But the concern in his eyes undid her completely. "I'm just tired," she said, and to her horror, tears started building behind her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know I'm not being very good company tonight." Alexander's expression softened immediately. "Hey," he said gently, reaching out to touch her arm. "You don't have to apologize for being human. When's the last time you had a full night's sleep?" Elena couldn't remember. Between her 3 jobs and Sophia's medical appointments, sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. "It's not important," she said, trying to pull herself together. "Let's go back to dinner." "The hell it's not important," Alexander said, his voice firm but kind. "Elena, you're dead on your feet. This can wait." Before Elena could protest, Alexander was walking back to their table and making polite excuses to the Japanese investors. Within minutes, he had rescheduled their meeting and was leading Elena out of the restaurant. "You didn't have to do that," Elena said as they waited for his car. "Those investors flew in just to meet with you. And they'll still be interested in our company tomorrow," Alexander replied. "Right now, I'm more concerned about you." Elena stared at him, confusion and gratitude warring in her chest. In her world, business always came first. Jobs were too hard to find and money too scarce to risk for something as simple as exhaustion. But Alexander had just walked away from a $1 million deal because she looked tired. "I don't understand you," she said quietly. Alexander smiled, the first genuine expression she had seen from him all evening. "Good. I'd hate to be predictable." Instead of taking her back to her hotel, Alexander directed his driver to a small cafe in Nob Hill that stayed open late. It was the kind of place Elena would never have been able to afford on her own, cozy and intimate, with soft lighting and the smell of expensive coffee in the air. "You don't have to babysit me," Elena said as Alexander ordered them both hot chocolate. "I know this isn't part of our arrangement." "Maybe I want to," Alexander replied. "Did you consider that?" Elena studied his face, looking for signs that he was just being polite. But his gray eyes were serious, and she could see genuine concern there that made her chest tighten with emotions she wasn't supposed to be feeling. "Tell me about your day," Alexander said when their drinks arrived. "And don't give me the polite version. Tell me what really happened." Elena hesitated. She had spent weeks being careful never to reveal anything real about her life, maintaining the fiction that she was Elena Martinez, the mysterious art consultant with no complications. But sitting in this quiet cafe with Alexander looking at her like she mattered, the walls she had built started to crumble. "I worked a double shift at my weekend job," she said finally. 12 hours on my feet, dealing with difficult customers and a broken coffee machine. Then I had to rush home to... She caught herself before mentioning Sophia. "To handle some family stuff." Alexander nodded, not pressing for details she wasn't ready to give. "What's your weekend job?" Elena felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I waitress at a diner in Oakland. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." "You waitress," Alexander repeated slowly. "Elena, you're supposed to be an art consultant from New York. Art consultants don't usually work weekend shifts at diners." Elena's heart stopped. She had been so tired, so off guard, that she had let the truth slip out. Now Alexander was looking at her with questions in his eyes, and Elena didn't know how to explain without revealing everything. "It's complicated," she said weakly. "I'm sure it is," Alexander replied, but his voice was gentle rather than accusatory. "Elena, who are you really?" The question hung between them like a bridge Elena wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. She could lie, make up some story about needing extra money or having debts to pay off. Or she could tell him the truth and risk everything, not just the money she needed for Sophia's surgery, but also whatever was growing between them that felt too real to be fake. "I'm someone who needs this job," she said finally. "Someone who can't afford to lose it by getting too personal." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his mug of hot chocolate. "What if I told you that I don't care about the job anymore?" he said finally. "What if I told you that I'd rather know the real Elena than keep paying for a performance?" Elena's breath caught. "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" Alexander leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "Elena, I've been to 100 business dinners with 100 different women, and I've never once left early because I was worried about someone's well-being. I've never sat in a cafe at 11 o'clock at night just wanting to make sure someone was okay." "Alexander, you can't." "I can't what? Care about you?" "Because it's too late for that warning." Elena felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't from exhaustion. "This is exactly what we agreed wouldn't happen. No emotional involvement, remember?" "I remember," Alexander said softly. "I also remember that some rules are made to be broken." Elena stared at him, seeing something in his expression that made her heart race and her stomach clench with fear at the same time. Alexander Reed was falling for her, but he was falling for a lie. He didn't know about Sophia, about the medical bills, about the real reason she had taken his money. He didn't know that Elena Martinez was a fiction created to hide the messy reality of Elena Rodriguez's life. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You think you do, but you don't." "Then tell me," Alexander said. "Tell me who you really are, Elena. I want to know everything." Elena looked around the cafe, at the other couples talking quietly over coffee, at the normal people living normal lives without the weight of impossible secrets. She wanted to tell him everything, about Sophia's bright smile and brave heart, about the fear that kept Elena awake at night, about how hard it was to be strong all the time when everything felt like it was falling apart. But she also knew that the truth would change everything between them. Alexander might be willing to overlook a struggling art consultant who worked weekend shifts, but a single mother with a sick child was a different kind of complication entirely. "I can't," she said finally. "I'm sorry, Alexander, but I can't." Alexander's face fell, and Elena saw the exact moment when he pulled back emotionally, retreating behind the careful walls that had protected him before she came along. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, I suppose that answers my question." "What question?" "Whether what I thought was happening between us was real, or just another part of the performance." Elena felt something break inside her chest. "Alexander, that's not." "It's late," Alexander said, standing and pulling out his wallet. "I should get you back to your hotel." The drive back was silent, heavy with things unsaid and opportunities missed. Elena stared out the window at the city lights, thinking about all the ways this night could have gone differently if she had been braver, or if her life had been simpler. When they reached her hotel, Alexander walked her to the lobby like he always did, but there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for tonight," Elena said, though she wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. "Of course," Alexander replied formally. "I'll have my assistant send you the details for Thursday's event." Elena nodded, hating how polite and professional he sounded after the intimacy of their conversation at the cafe. "Alexander, Good night, Elena," he said, and walked away before she could finish her sentence. Elena stood in the hotel lobby long after his car had disappeared, thinking about the look in his eyes when she had refused to tell him the truth. She had been so focused on protecting herself and Sophia that she hadn't considered the possibility that her lies might hurt Alexander too. For the first time since she had started this arrangement, Elena wondered if the money was worth the cost. Not just to her, but to the man who was beginning to mean more to her than any amount of dollars ever could. But as she rode the elevator up to her room, Elena thought about Sophia sleeping in their tiny apartment across town, and she knew she would keep lying for as long as it took to save her daughter's life. Even if it meant breaking her own heart in the process. Elena's carefully constructed world began to unravel on a Tuesday morning when Sophia collapsed at school. Elena was in the middle of cleaning a hotel room, scrubbing bathroom tiles and trying not to think about the awkward distance that had grown between her and Alexander since their conversation at the cafe, when her phone rang. "Ms. Rodriguez? This is Nancy from Roosevelt Elementary." Sophia's had an episode, and the paramedics are taking her to Children's Hospital. You need to come right away. Elena's blood turned to ice. She dropped the cleaning supplies and ran, not bothering to explain to her supervisor why she was leaving in the middle of her shift. The bus ride to the hospital felt like it lasted hours, every red light and traffic jam another obstacle between her and her daughter. She found Sophia in the emergency room, small and pale against the white hospital sheets, an oxygen mask covering half her face. Dr. Patel, Sophia's cardiologist, was waiting with grim news. The episode was more severe than the previous ones, he said quietly, leading Elena to a corner where they could speak privately. Her heart is working much harder now. We can't wait much longer for the surgery. How long? Elena asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Weeks, maybe a month if we're lucky. I'm sorry, Elena. I know the financial situation is difficult, but we can't delay anymore. Elena sank into a plastic chair, the weight of impossibility crushing down on her. She had been so close, just 2 more months of her arrangement with Alexander and she would have had the money for Sophia's surgery. But 2 months might as well be 2 years now. There are programs, Dr. Patel said gently. Charities that help with medical costs. It would mean a lot of paperwork and waiting, but... There's no time for waiting, Elena interrupted. You just said she has weeks. Dr. Patel nodded sadly. I know. I'm sorry. Elena spent the rest of the day beside Sophia's bed, holding her daughter's hand and trying to figure out how to save her life when every option seemed impossible. Sophia was awake but weak, her usual bright chatter replaced by labored breathing that broke Elena's heart. Mama, Sophia whispered around the oxygen mask, am I going to be okay? Elena forced a smile, the same smile she had been wearing for 7 years every time Sophia asked that question. Of course you are, baby. Mama's going to take care of everything. But for the first time, Elena wasn't sure how she was going to keep that promise. It was nearly midnight when Elena finally left the hospital, after the doctors assured her Sophia was stable for the night. Elena took 2 buses back to her apartment, exhaustion and despair weighing her down like stones. She had missed her evening with Alexander, some charity auction she was supposed to attend, but she couldn't bring herself to care about maintaining her fake relationship when her daughter's life was hanging in the balance. Elena was unlocking her apartment door when she noticed the figure sitting on the steps of her building. Her heart nearly stopped when she realized it was Alexander, still dressed in his tuxedo from whatever event he had attended alone. Alexander? She said, confusion and panic warring in her voice. What are you doing here? Alexander stood slowly, and Elena could see concern etched across his features. You didn't show up tonight. You didn't answer your phone. I was worried. Elena stared at him, her exhausted brain struggling to process what this meant. Alexander Reed was sitting on the steps of her rundown apartment building in East Oakland at midnight, worried because she had missed their fake date. How did you find me? She asked. It wasn't hard, Alexander said quietly. Elena Rodriguez, apartment 2B. I hired a private investigator 2 weeks ago. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. You what? I needed to know who you really were, Alexander said. I needed to understand why you wouldn't tell me the truth. Elena's hands were shaking as she unlocked her door. So you know. I know you're not an art consultant from New York, Alexander said, following her into her tiny apartment. I know you work 3 jobs and live in a 1-bedroom apartment and that your real name is Elena Rodriguez, not Martinez. Elena's apartment was a study in contrast to Alexander's world of luxury. The furniture was secondhand, the walls were thin, and the carpet had seen better decades. But it was clean and filled with evidence of Sophia's presence. Drawings on the refrigerator, books stacked on every surface, a small bed tucked into the corner of the living room. Alexander took it all in silently, and Elena waited for disgust or disappointment to cross his features. Instead, she saw something that looked like understanding. Where is she? Alexander asked quietly. Elena's heart stopped. Where is who? Your daughter, Elena. Where is Sophia? Elena sank onto her couch, all the fight draining out of her. Of course he knew about Sophia. If he had hired a private investigator, he knew everything. She's in the hospital, Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. She collapsed at school today. The doctors say she doesn't have much time left. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he sat down beside Elena on the couch, careful not to crowd her. Tell me about her, he said. Elena looked at him, searching his face for judgment or anger. Instead, she found only patience and concern. So she told him. About Sophia's quick wit and love of books, about how brave she was during doctor visits and how she never complained about the things other kids took for granted. About the way she read everything she could get her hands on and asked impossible questions about the universe. She wants to be a scientist when she grows up, Elena said, tears flowing freely now. She wants to study stars and discover new planets. She doesn't understand why her heart doesn't work right, but she's never let it stop her from dreaming. Alexander listened without interrupting, and when Elena finished, he was quiet for a long time. The money, he said finally. From our arrangement. It's for her surgery. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Why didn't you just tell me? Alexander asked. When I first interviewed you, why didn't you explain what you needed the money for? Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Because rich men don't hire poor single mothers to be their fake girlfriends, she said. They hire uncomplicated women who won't bring drama into their lives. Elena, do you have any idea how insulting that is? Elena looked up, surprised by the sharpness in his voice. You thought I was so shallow, so selfish, that I would turn away a mother trying to save her child's life? Alexander's gray eyes were intense with emotion. You thought money was more important to me than human decency? I thought you were like everyone else with money, Elena said defensively. I thought you wouldn't want to get involved in someone else's problems. Alexander stood up and began pacing the small living room. I've been falling in love with you for weeks, he said, his voice raw with emotion. Do you understand that? I've been falling in love with someone who thought I was a monster. Elena's heart clenched at his words. Alexander, I didn't. You did, he said, turning to face her. You looked at me and saw someone who would let a child die rather than risk emotional involvement. How am I supposed to feel about that? Elena stood up too, anger and exhaustion making her bold. You want to know how you're supposed to feel? Try spending 7 years watching your child suffer while doctors tell you there's nothing they can do without money you don't have. Try working 3 jobs and still not being able to afford the surgery that could save her life. Try being so desperate that you're willing to sell yourself to a stranger just for the chance to keep your daughter alive. Alexander stopped pacing, the anger draining from his face. Elena. You hired a private investigator because I wouldn't tell you my secrets, Elena continued, her voice rising. But you want to know the truth? The truth is that I've been lying to you every single day because I was terrified that if you knew who I really was, you'd decide I wasn't worth the money. And maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not worth it. But my daughter is. Elena was crying now, 7 years of fear and exhaustion and desperation pouring out of her in a flood of words. Alexander watched her, something shifting in his expression as he truly understood for the first time what her life had been like. How much does the surgery cost? He asked quietly. Elena laughed bitterly. More than you're paying me. More than I could make in 5 years. It doesn't matter now anyway. She needs it within weeks and I don't have the money. Alexander pulled out his phone and started dialing. Dr. James Chin at UCSF Medical Center. Tell him Alexander Reed is calling about a pediatric cardiac patient named Sofia Rodriguez. Elena stared at him in shock. What are you doing? Getting your daughter the best cardiac surgeon in the state, Alexander said, holding up a finger as someone answered his call. Dr. Chin? It's Alexander Reed. I need a favor. Elena listened in stunned silence as Alexander arranged for Sofia to be transferred to UCSF and scheduled for surgery with one of the most renowned pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country. He spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to making things happen, but also with a gentleness that suggested he understood how precious Sofia was to Elena. It's done, Alexander said, hanging up the phone. Dr. Chen will see her tomorrow morning. The surgery is scheduled for Friday. Elena couldn't speak. She stared at Alexander, overwhelmed by gratitude and confusion and emotions she couldn't name. Why? She finally managed to ask. Alexander sat back down beside her, his gray eyes serious. Because she's your daughter, he said simply. And because I should have been someone you felt safe enough to tell the truth to from the beginning. Elena felt fresh tears starting. I can't pay you back. Not for this. It's too much. I don't want you to pay me back, Alexander said. This isn't a loan, Elena. This is what people do when they care about each other. Elena looked at him through her tears, seeing not the cold billionaire from the magazine photos, but a man who had just moved mountains to save her daughter's life without expecting anything in return. I don't understand you, she whispered. Alexander smiled, the same words she had said to him at the cafe. Good, he replied. I'd hate to be predictable. Elena laughed despite her tears, and for the first time in weeks she felt like she could breathe again. Sofia was going to have her surgery. Her daughter was going to live. But as she looked at Alexander sitting in her tiny apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her real life, Elena realized that everything had changed between them. The contract that had brought them together was irrelevant now. The lies that had kept them apart were exposed. Whatever happened next would be real, for better or worse. "What happens now?" she asked. Alexander reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady against hers. "Now we save your daughter's life," he said. "And then we figure out what comes after that." Elena nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. For the first time since this all began, she was ready to find out what came after the lies. The pediatric ward at UCSF Medical Center was a different world from the county hospital where Sophia usually received care. The halls were brighter, the equipment newer, and the staff moved with the confidence that came from having the best resources money could buy. Elena felt out of place in her jeans and second-hand sweater, but Alexander had insisted on accompanying her for Sophia's pre-surgery consultation. "You don't have to be here," Elena said for the third time as they waited for Dr. Chin. "This isn't your responsibility." "Yes, it is," Alexander replied quietly. "Whether you understand it or not, Elena, you and Sophia are my responsibility now." Elena wanted to argue, but she was too nervous about the meeting to focus on anything else. In a few hours she would finally meet her daughter face to face with Alexander, and she had no idea how to explain who he was or why he was suddenly in their lives. Dr. Chin turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He reviewed Sophia's medical records with the same careful attention Elena had seen Alexander give to business contracts, asking detailed questions and making notes on a tablet. "The good news," Dr. Chin said finally, "is that Sophia is an excellent candidate for the surgery. Her age works in her favor, and despite the severity of her condition, her overall health is remarkably good." "And the bad news?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear it. "The surgery is complex and will require several hours. There are always risks with procedures of this magnitude, especially in pediatric patients." Dr. Chen's expression was compassionate but honest. "However, I believe Sophia has an excellent chance of a full recovery with proper care." Elena felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "When can we meet her?" "She's being transferred from Children's Hospital this afternoon. I've arranged for her to have a private room so she can settle in before surgery tomorrow morning." Alexander spoke for the first time since they had entered Dr. Chen's office. "What does she need for recovery? Physical therapy, medications, follow-up care?" "The recovery will be lengthy," Dr. Chen replied. "Several weeks in the hospital, then months of careful monitoring at home. She'll need to avoid strenuous activity for at least 6 months, and there will be regular cardiology appointments for the rest of her life." Elena did quick math in her head, calculating lost wages and medical costs that would extend far beyond the surgery itself. Even with Alexander paying for the operation, the recovery would likely bankrupt her. "Cost isn't a concern," Alexander said as if reading her thoughts. "Whatever she needs for as long as she needs it." Elena stared at him, overwhelmed by his generosity and terrified by the debt she was accumulating. But before she could protest, Dr. Chen was handing them paperwork and explaining the surgery schedule. 3 hours later, Elena was walking down the pediatric ward with Alexander beside her, approaching Sophia's room with a mixture of excitement and terror. Her daughter was about to meet the man who was saving her life, and Elena still hadn't figured out how to explain their relationship. "What do I tell her about you?" Elena asked, stopping outside Sophia's door. Alexander considered this. "Tell her I'm your friend. That's not a lie." Elena nodded, though friend seemed inadequate to describe what Alexander had become to her. She pushed open the door to find Sophia sitting up in bed, looking tiny in the large hospital gown but alert and curious about her new surroundings. "Mama?" Sophia's face lit up when she saw Elena. "This place is so fancy. The TV has like 100 channels, and the nurse gave me ice cream even though it's not dessert time." Elena hugged her daughter carefully, mindful of the various tubes and monitors. "How are you feeling, baby?" "Tired but better than yesterday. The doctor here is really nice and he explained everything about my heart with pictures and everything." Sophia's attention turned to Alexander, who had been hanging back by the door. "Who's your friend, Mama?" Elena took a deep breath. "Sophia, this is Alexander. He's someone very special to me." Alexander stepped forward, and Elena was touched to see that he looked nervous. "Hello, Sophia. It's very nice to meet you." Sophia studied Alexander with the frank curiosity of a 7-year-old. "Are you Mama's boyfriend?" Elena felt her cheeks flush, but Alexander smiled. "I'm her friend. A very good friend who cares about both of you very much. Are you rich? Sophia asked, with the bluntness that only children could get away with. Sophia. Elena protested, but Alexander laughed. Yes, I am. Is that okay? Sophia considered this seriously. I guess so. Mama works really hard for money, so it's probably nice not to have to worry about it. Elena saw something flicker across Alexander's face at Sophia's words, a recognition of how much her daughter understood about their financial struggles despite Elena's efforts to shield her. Your mama does work very hard, Alexander agreed. She's one of the strongest people I know. Sophia beamed at this assessment. She really is. She takes care of me even when she's super tired, and she reads to me every night even when she has to work late. What kind of books do you like? Alexander asked, settling into the chair beside Sophia's bed. Elena watched in amazement as her daughter launched into an enthusiastic description of her favorite stories, from Harry Potter to books about space exploration. Alexander listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own favorite childhood books. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was your age, Alexander told Sophia. I used to spend hours looking at the stars and imagining what it would be like to travel to other planets. Really? Sophia's eyes went wide. What happened? Why didn't you become an astronaut? Alexander smiled. I discovered I was better with computers than rockets. But I still love reading about space. Maybe after your surgery, when you're feeling better, I could bring you some books about astronomy. That would be awesome. Sophia looked at Elena. Mama, I like your friend. Elena felt tears threatening again, but this time they were happy tears. Watching Alexander with her daughter, seeing how gentle and patient he was, Elena realized that her feelings for him had grown beyond gratitude or attraction. She was falling in love with the man who had just spent 20 minutes discussing black holes with a 7-year-old like it was the most important conversation he'd ever had. I like him too, baby, Elena said softly. They spent the rest of the afternoon in Sophia's room. Alexander told stories about his work that he made sound like adventures rather than business deals. He showed Sophia pictures on his phone of the office building where he worked, promising to take her to see the view from the top floor once she was recovered. He listened to her concerns about the surgery with the same seriousness he would give to a board meeting. But it was the small moments that affected Elena most. The way Alexander instinctively moved to help when Sophia needed to use the bathroom, not fazed by the medical equipment or the reality of a sick child. How he remembered that she liked strawberry ice cream better than chocolate, and how he made sure she had extra blankets when she mentioned being cold. He's really nice, Mama, Sophia whispered to Elena when Alexander stepped out to take a phone call. And he looks at you the way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in the movie? Elena's heart skipped. What do you mean? Like you're the most beautiful thing he's ever seen, Sophia said matter-of-factly. Are you going to marry him? Sophia, honey, it's not that simple. Why not? He's nice, he's rich, so you wouldn't have to work so much, and he likes me. Plus, I can tell you like him too because you keep smiling when you look at him. Elena was saved from having to answer by Alexander returning to the room, but Sophia's words stayed with her. Her daughter had seen in one afternoon what Elena had been trying to deny for weeks, that whatever was happening between her and Alexander had moved far beyond their fake relationship. As evening approached, the nurses began preparing Sophia for her pre-surgery routine. Elena and Alexander were asked to step out while they ran tests and got her ready for the morning. She's remarkable, Alexander said as they walked to the hospital cafeteria. I can see where she gets her strength from. She's been through so much already, Elena replied. Sometimes I think she's braver than I am. She's not braver than you, Alexander said firmly. Elena, do you have any idea what you've accomplished? Raising a child like Sophia while working 3 jobs and dealing with constant medical crises? Most people would have crumbled under that kind of pressure. Elena felt her cheeks warm at his praise. I just did what any mother would do. No, Alexander said, stopping in the middle of the hallway. You did what an extraordinary mother would do. Sophia is lucky to have you. Elena looked up at him, seeing admiration and something deeper in his gray eyes. Alexander, I need you to know, what you're doing for us, paying for her surgery, being here, I can never repay you for this. I don't want you to repay me, Alexander said. Elena, what I want is for you to trust me. What I want is for you to stop seeing me as some stranger who's doing you a favor and start seeing me as someone who cares about you and Sophia. I do trust you, Elena said quietly. That's what scares me. Alexander reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady against hers. Why does that scare you? Elena looked around the hospital corridor at the families dealing with their own crises, at the evidence of how fragile life could be. Because trusting people has never worked out well for me. Sophia's father left the moment he found out she was sick. My parents cut me off when I got pregnant. Every time I've let someone get close, they've found a reason to leave. I'm not going anywhere, Alexander said, his voice firm with conviction. You say that now, Elena replied. But you don't know what you're signing up for. Sophia's recovery will be long and complicated. There will be setbacks and scary moments and medical bills that never end. This isn't going to be easy or romantic or anything like those fake dates we've been going on. Alexander smiled, and Elena saw determination in his expression that reminded her of the successful businessman he was. Elena, do you really think I've made it this far in life by running away when things get difficult? Elena studied his face, seeing the strength that had built his empire and the gentleness that had won her daughter's heart in a single afternoon. For the first time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, Alexander Reed was the kind of man who stayed when things got hard. Tomorrow's going to be terrifying, she said. Yes, it is, Alexander agreed. But you won't face it alone. Not anymore. Elena nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. Whatever happened in the morning, whatever challenges lay ahead during Sophia's recovery, she wouldn't be facing them by herself. For the first time in 7 years, Elena had someone standing beside her, ready to weather whatever storms came their way. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing us, Elena said. For seeing me and Sophia as people worth fighting for. Alexander lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Elena, you and Sophia are the most worthwhile fight I've ever found. As they walked back toward Sophia's room, Elena felt something shift inside her chest. The walls she had built to protect herself were finally coming down, and for the first time in years she was brave enough to hope for a future that included love. The night before Sophia's surgery passed in a blur of restless sleep and nervous energy. Elena had slept in the chair beside her daughter's bed, waking every few hours to check that Sophia was still breathing peacefully. Alexander had gone home around midnight, but not before promising to be back first thing in the morning. Elena watched the sunrise through the hospital window, thinking about how much her life had changed in just a few months. 3 months ago, she had been a desperate single mother willing to pretend to be someone else for money. Now she was sitting in one of the best hospitals in the state, watching her daughter sleep peacefully before a surgery that would save her life, all because of a man who had somehow seen past her lies to the person she really was. Mama? Sophia's voice was soft and drowsy. Is it time for my surgery yet? Not yet, baby. It's still early. How are you feeling? Sophia sat up carefully, mindful of the 4-line in her arm. Nervous, but excited too. Dr. Chin said after the surgery, I'll be able to run and play like other kids. Elena smiled, though tears threatened at the hope in her daughter's voice. That's right. You'll be able to do anything you want. Will Alexander come see me after? I want to tell him about the surgery when I wake up. Elena's heart tightened at how naturally Sophia had included Alexander in her plans. I'm sure he'll want to hear all about it. As if summoned by their conversation, Alexander appeared in the doorway carrying coffee for Elena and a small wrapped package. Good morning, ladies, he said, his voice cheerful despite the early hour. How are we feeling today? Nervous but ready, Sophia replied. What's in the package? Alexander handed Elena the coffee, then sat down beside Sophia's bed. A little something to keep you company during recovery. But you can only open it after your surgery. Sophia's eyes lit up with curiosity, but she nodded solemnly. I promise I'll wait. Dr. Chin arrived an hour later with the surgical team to take Sophia to the operating room. Elena walked beside the gurney as far as she was allowed, holding her daughter's hand and trying to project confidence she didn't feel. I love you, baby, Elena said, kissing Sophia's forehead. I'll be right here when you wake up. Love you too, Mama. Tell Alexander thank you for my present, even though I don't know what it is yet. Elena watched through tears as they wheeled her daughter away, then turned to find Alexander waiting with open arms. She collapsed against his chest, finally allowing herself to feel the terror she had been holding back. She's going to be okay, Alexander murmured into her hair. She's strong and she has the best surgical team in the state. I know, Elena whispered. I can't lose her, Alexander. She's everything to me. You won't lose her, Alexander said firmly. But Elena, you need to know that even if something goes wrong, you won't face it alone. I'm not going anywhere. Elena pulled back to look at him, seeing sincerity in his gray eyes that made her heart race. Why are you doing this? All of this? You barely know us. That's where you're wrong, Alexander said, his hands still resting on her shoulders. I know that you read to Sophia every night even when you're exhausted. I know that you work 3 jobs to pay for her medical care without ever complaining. I know that you're the kind of person who puts everyone else's needs before your own. I know that you make terrible coffee but somehow perfect pancakes. Elena let out a watery laugh. You remember that? I remember everything you've told me, Alexander said. Elena, I know you better than you think I do. And what I know makes me want to be part of your life, not just for 6 months, but for as long as you'll have me. Before Elena could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and smiled. Carmen is here. She wanted to be here for the surgery. Elena's eyes widened in surprise. Carmen was her best friend and co-worker from the hotel, but Elena had never mentioned her to Alexander. How do you know Carmen? I may have called her last night to let her know what was happening. I thought you could use all the support you could get today. Elena felt fresh tears threatening. Alexander had thought to call her friend, had considered what she might need beyond just his presence. It was such a small gesture, but it showed a thoughtfulness that took her breath away. Carmen arrived in the waiting room like a whirlwind of energy and concern, pulling Elena into a fierce hug before turning to study Alexander with protective intensity. So you're the mysterious boyfriend, Carmen said, hands on her hips. The one who's been keeping my girl out late on fancy dates. Carmen, Elena started, but Alexander stepped forward with a smile. I'm Alexander. Elena has told me a lot about you. Carmen's expression softened slightly. She has. She said you're the best friend anyone could ask for, and that you make the world's best chocolate chip cookies. Carmen beamed at this. I like him already, she announced to Elena. He has good taste and knows how to give compliments. The next few hours passed slowly. Carmen entertained them with stories from the hotel, carefully avoiding any mention of Elena's other jobs. Alexander made phone calls to his office, handling business matters in quiet tones while staying close enough to provide comfort when Elena needed it. Dr. Chin appeared in the waiting room 4 hours after the surgery had begun, still in his surgical scrubs but with a smile on his face that made Elena's knees weak with relief. The surgery was a complete success, he announced. Sophia did beautifully. The repair was more straightforward than we anticipated, and her heart is already showing improved function. Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed with gratitude and relief. Alexander was beside her immediately, his arm around her shoulders as she processed the news. When can I see her? Elena asked. She's in recovery now. It will be another hour or so before she wakes up, but you can sit with her. Elena nodded, wiping away tears of joy. Her daughter was going to be okay. After 7 years of fear and uncertainty, Sophia was finally going to have a normal, healthy life. Thank you, she said to Dr. Chin. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, Dr. Chin replied. Sophia is a remarkable young lady. She's going to do very well. In the recovery room, Elena sat beside Sophia's bed holding her daughter's small hand while Alexander stood quietly nearby. Sophia looked so peaceful sleeping, with better color in her cheeks than Elena had seen in months. She looks different already, Alexander observed quietly. The oxygen levels in her blood are probably higher than they've been in years, Elena said. Her body can finally get what it needs. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Sophia sleep and listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor that now showed a strong, regular rhythm. Elena, Alexander said finally, I need to tell you something. Elena looked up at him, noting the serious tone in his voice. Our contract, Alexander continued, the fake relationship arrangement. I want to tear it up. Elena's heart stopped. What do you mean? I mean I don't want to pay you to pretend to care about me anymore, Alexander said, his gray eyes intense. What I want is to know if there's any chance that Elena Rodriguez might be interested in dating Alexander Reed for real. Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. Alexander, I know this complicates things, he said quickly. I know you have Sophia to think about and her recovery is going to take months. I know you probably think I'm just caught up in the emotion of today. But Elena, what I feel for you isn't gratitude or sympathy or some kind of hero complex. It's love. Elena's breath caught. You love me? I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make me laugh even when you're exhausted. I love how fiercely you protect the people you care about. I love that you read romance novels because you believe in happy endings even when your own life has been difficult. Alexander moved closer to her chair. I love that you taught me what it means to care about someone more than yourself. Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Alexander, you don't understand what you're saying. Dating me, being with me and Sophia, it's not going to be like those charity galas and business dinners. It's going to be doctor's appointments and physical therapy sessions and a 7-year-old who asks a million questions and needs attention and… Elena, Alexander interrupted gently, do you really think any of that scares me? Do you think I want less of your real life, not more of it? Elena looked down at Sophia, sleeping peacefully after the surgery that had saved her life. Her daughter had been through so much, had shown such incredible bravery and resilience. Maybe it was time for Elena to be brave too. I love you too, she whispered, the words barely audible. Alexander's face transformed with joy. You do. I've been fighting it for weeks, Elena admitted. I kept telling myself it was just gratitude or that I was getting caught up in playing a role. But watching you with Sophia yesterday, seeing how gentle and patient you were with her, I realized that what I feel for you is real. Alexander reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Elena Rodriguez, would you like to go on a real date with me sometime? Elena laughed through her tears. What kind of date? The kind where we both use our real names and talk about our actual lives. The kind where I pick you up at your apartment in Oakland instead of a fancy hotel. The kind where we figure out what we have together without any contracts or pretenses. I'd like that, Elena said softly. But Alexander, you need to understand, my life isn't glamorous. I live in a tiny apartment and work multiple jobs and have a daughter who's going to need a lot of care for the next few months. If you're looking for some sophisticated woman who can be your perfect accessory at business events. Elena, Alexander said, his voice firm but loving, I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by sophisticated women who saw me as an accessory to their social climbing. What I want is someone real. Someone who challenges me and makes me laugh and reminds me that there are things more important than business deals and stock prices. Mama? Sophia's voice was weak but alert. Is that you? Elena turned immediately to her daughter, taking her hand. I'm right here, baby. How are you feeling? Tired but different. Better, I think. Sophia's eyes found Alexander standing beside the bed. Alexander. You came back. Of course I did, Alexander said, moving closer so Sophia could see him better. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Dr. Chin says the surgery went perfectly. Really? So my heart is fixed now. It's fixed, Elena confirmed, unable to keep the joy out of her voice. You're going to be able to do all the things other kids do. Sophia beamed, though she was clearly still drowsy from the anesthesia. Can I open my present now? Alexander laughed. If your mama says it's okay. Elena nodded, and Alexander handed Sophia the small package. Inside was a beautiful book about astronomy, with photographs of nebulae and galaxies that made Sophia gasp with wonder. It's beautiful, Sophia breathed, carefully turning the pages. Look at all these stars, Mama. There's something else, Alexander said, flipping to the front of the book where he had written an inscription. For Sophia, who taught me that the bravest explorers are the ones who never stop dreaming, even when the journey gets difficult. Love, Alexander. Elena read the inscription over Sophia's shoulder, her heart full to bursting. Alexander had written love, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he had already become part of their family. Thank you, Sophia said seriously. This is the best present ever. After I get better, will you teach me about all the constellations? I'd love to, Alexander replied. Maybe we can even go stargazing together. I know a place outside the city where you can see the Milky Way. Elena watched this exchange, overwhelmed by how naturally Alexander had stepped into their lives. He wasn't just tolerating Sophia to get to Elena, he genuinely cared about her daughter, treated her like she mattered, made her feel special and important. I'm sleepy again, Sophia said, her eyelids drooping. Will you both be here when I wake up? We'll be here, Elena promised, squeezing her daughter's hand. Good, Sophia murmured. I like having Alexander around. He makes you smile more, Mama? As Sophia drifted back to sleep, Elena felt Alexander's hand find hers. She looked up at him, seeing her own emotions reflected in his gray eyes, love, hope, and the beginning of something that felt like forever. So, Alexander said quietly, when this is all over and Sophia is recovered, would you like to have dinner at your apartment? I'll bring groceries and you can show me how to make those perfect pancakes. Elena smiled, imagining Alexander in her tiny kitchen, probably burning pancakes while Sophia supervised from the table. It would be chaotic and imperfect and nothing like the elegant restaurants they had been frequenting. It would be real life, messy and beautiful and complicated. I'd love that, Elena said. But I should warn you, Sophia will probably want to tell you everything she's learned about astronomy, and she's not exactly quiet when she gets excited about something. I'm counting on it, Alexander replied, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. Elena, I want all of it. The good days and the difficult ones, the quiet moments and the chaotic ones. I want to be part of your real life, not just the pretty version you show to the world. Elena looked down at their joined hands, dark and light intertwined, and felt the last of her walls crumble. She had spent so long protecting herself and Sophia from disappointment that she had almost missed the chance at real happiness. I love you, she said again, the words coming easier this time. I love you too, Alexander replied. Both of you. And I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in 7 years, Elena believed in happy endings again. 2 weeks after Sophia's surgery, Elena's carefully rebuilt world came crashing down again when Marcus Webb showed up at the hospital. Elena was helping Sophia with her physical therapy exercises when she saw him through the window of Sophia's room, tall, handsome in a rough way, and wearing the same charming smile that had once made her believe in love. Her blood turned to ice as memories flooded back, promises broken, phone calls ignored, and the look of disgust on his face when he learned about Sophia's heart condition. Mama, you look like you've seen a ghost, Sophia said, following Elena's gaze to the hallway. Who's that man? He's coming this way. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as Marcus knocked on the door frame, his smile widening when he saw Sophia. Well, look at this little princess, Marcus said, stepping into the room without invitation. You must be Sophia. I'm Marcus, your daddy. Elena moved instinctively between Marcus and her daughter, every protective instinct screaming danger. Get out, she said quietly. Right now. Now, Elena, is that any way to greet an old friend? Marcus's voice was smooth, practiced. I heard through the grapevine that little Sophia here had some fancy heart surgery. Thought I'd come see how my daughter is doing. I'm not your daughter, Sophia said with the blunt honesty of a child. My mama told me my father didn't want me because I was sick. You left before I was even born. Marcus's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Well, sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're scared. I was young and stupid, but I'm here now. Elena felt rage building in her chest like a physical thing. You have no right to be here. No right to call her your daughter after 8 years of nothing. Actually, I have every right, Marcus said, his tone turning harder. According to California law, I'm still her biological father. And from what I hear, you've been living pretty well lately. New clothes, fancy hospitals, rich boyfriend paying for everything. Elena's stomach dropped. Marcus had been watching her, learning about her relationship with Alexander. But how? See, Elena, I've been doing some research, Marcus continued, settling into the chair by Sophia's bed like he belonged there. Turns out your new boyfriend is worth about $2 billion. And here you are, playing house with him while our daughter gets the best medical care money can buy. Mama, I don't like him, Sophia whispered, pressing closer to Elena's side. It's okay, baby, Elena said, though nothing about this situation was okay. Marcus, you need to leave. Now. Oh, I don't think so, Marcus said, his mask of charm dropping completely. You see, I think I deserve a piece of this good fortune. After all, if it wasn't for me, little Sophia here wouldn't exist. Seems only fair that I should benefit from her relationship with Alexander Reed. Elena's blood ran cold as she understood what Marcus was really doing here. You want money. I want what's owed to me, Marcus said. 8 years of child support plus interest. And maybe a little something extra for keeping quiet about certain facts. What facts? Elena asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Marcus's smile turned predatory. Like how you've been lying to your rich boyfriend about who you really are. Like how you took money to pretend to be his girlfriend while hiding the fact that you had a kid. Rich men don't like being played for fools, Elena. Especially not by women with complicated pasts. Elena felt the room spinning around her. Marcus was threatening to expose everything to Alexander, not just the lies she had told at the beginning, but twisting them into something uglier, making it sound like she was still deceiving him even after they had fallen in love. Alexander knows about Sophia, Elena said weakly. He knows everything. Does he? Marcus asked with mock surprise. Does he know about your other job? The one where you take your clothes off for money? Elena's heart stopped. She had worked as a dancer for exactly 3 weeks, 8 years ago when she was pregnant and desperate for money to pay for prenatal care. It was something she had never told anyone, something she had buried so deep she sometimes pretended it had never happened. That's not. Elena couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't find words to explain something that felt impossible to explain. Only what, Elena? Only danced topless for a few weeks? Only took money from strange men who wanted to look at your body? Marcus's voice was loud enough for anyone in the hallway to hear. I wonder what your billionaire boyfriend would think about that. Or the fancy doctors here at this expensive hospital. Stop it, Elena whispered, aware that Sophia was listening to every word even though she didn't understand what Marcus was talking about. I'll stop when you pay me what I'm owed, Marcus said. $50,000 should cover it. That's nothing to someone dating Alexander Reed, right? I don't have $50,000, Elena said, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The money Alexander had paid her for their arrangement was sitting in her bank account, intended for Sophia's medical expenses that Alexander had ended up covering himself. Then you better find it, Marcus said, standing to leave. Because if you don't have it by Friday, I'm going to pay a visit to your boyfriend. I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear about all the things you've been hiding from him. Marcus paused at the door, his expression turning almost sympathetic. You know, Elena, you could have just called me when you needed help with Sophia's medical bills. Instead, you decided to con some rich guy. That doesn't say much about your character, does it? He left before Elena could respond, and she sank into the chair beside Sophia's bed, her entire body shaking with shock and fear. Mama, what did that man mean? Sophia asked quietly. What was he talking about? Elena struggled to find words that would make sense to a 7-year-old. Sometimes, baby, when people are desperate and scared, they make choices they're not proud of. A long time ago, before you were born, I had to work a job that wasn't very nice. But it was only for a little while, and it helped me take care of you when you were growing in my tummy. Sophia was quiet for a moment, processing this. Are you in trouble now? I don't know, Elena said honestly. I hope not. But Elena knew she was in serious trouble. Marcus wasn't just asking for money, he was threatening to destroy everything she had built with Alexander. And the worst part was that he was right about one thing. She had been lying to Alexander even after they had supposedly cleared the air between them. She had never told him about those 3 weeks when she was 18 and pregnant and so desperate for money that she had been willing to do anything. Alexander would find out eventually. Marcus would make sure of that. And when he did, would Alexander understand that Elena had made those choices out of desperation, not greed? Or would he see them as evidence that she was exactly the kind of person who would lie and manipulate for money? Elena spent the rest of the day in a fog of anxiety, going through the motions of helping Sophia with her recovery while her mind raced through impossible scenarios. She could pay Marcus the money, but there was no guarantee he wouldn't come back for more. She could tell Alexander herself, but the thought of seeing disappointment in his eyes made her feel sick. When Alexander arrived that evening, bringing dinner from Sophia's favorite restaurant, Elena could barely look at him. He was so good, so decent, and she was terrified that she was about to lose him forever. You're quiet tonight, Alexander observed as they sat in the hospital family lounge while Sophia napped. Everything okay? Elena wanted to tell him everything, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain that she had once again been lying to him, that there were parts of her past she was too ashamed to share? Just tired, she said, hating herself for the lie. Alexander studied her face with the perceptive gaze that had made him such a successful businessman. Elena, what's wrong? You've been different all day. Before Elena could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. 2 days left. Hope your boyfriend is understanding about your interesting employment history. Elena's hands shook as she read the message, and Alexander noticed immediately. Who is that? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Elena stared at her phone, knowing that this was the moment of truth. She could lie again, make up some story about work or friends. Or she could be brave enough to tell Alexander the truth and trust that their love was strong enough to survive it. It's Sophia's father, she said quietly. He showed up today. Alexander's expression hardened. What did he want? Elena took a shaky breath. Money. And he's threatening to tell you things about my past if I don't pay him. What kind of things? Elena closed her eyes, unable to look at Alexander's face as she spoke. When I was 18 and pregnant with Sophia, I was completely alone. My parents had cut me off, I had no money for prenatal care, and I was terrified that something would happen to her if I couldn't afford proper medical care. Alexander waited patiently for her to continue, but Elena could feel the tension radiating from him. I worked as a dancer for 3 weeks, she said in a rush. At a club. I only danced, I never did anything else, but it was enough money to pay for doctor visits and vitamins and the things Sophia needed. The silence stretched between them, heavy with Elena's shame and fear. When she finally opened her eyes, Alexander was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You were 18 and pregnant and scared," he said slowly. "And you did what you had to do to take care of your daughter." Elena nodded, tears burning her eyes. "I'm not proud of it. I've never told anyone about it, not even Carmen. But Marcus knows, and he's threatening to tell you unless I give him $50,000. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Elena felt her heart breaking as she waited for his judgment, his disappointment, his decision that she wasn't worth the complications she brought to his life. Instead, Alexander reached out and took her hands in his. "Elena," he said gently, "do you really think I would judge you for doing whatever it took to protect Sophia?" Elena stared at him in shock. "You're not angry?" "I'm furious," Alexander said, but his anger wasn't directed at her. "I'm furious that you were put in that position. I'm furious that an 18-year-old girl had to make that choice because no one else would help her. And I'm especially furious that Marcus is now trying to use your past to hurt you." Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't think less of me?" "Elena, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met," Alexander said firmly. "You were barely an adult, facing pregnancy alone, and you did whatever it took to take care of your child. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. But what if Marcus tells other people? What if it gets out to the press or your business associates?" Alexander's expression turned cold in a way Elena had never seen before. "Let me worry about Marcus," he said quietly. "No one threatens the woman I love and gets away with it." Elena felt a chill at the tone in Alexander's voice. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure Marcus Webb never bothers you or Sophia again," Alexander said. "And Elena? Next time someone from your past tries to cause trouble, you tell me immediately. We face these things together now." Elena nodded, overwhelmed by his support and love. She had been so afraid that the truth would drive him away, but instead, it had brought them closer together. Alexander wasn't just accepting her past, he was ready to fight for their future. But as they sat in that hospital lounge, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus wasn't done with them yet. He had spent 8 years as a con artist and manipulator, and she doubted he would give up easily. The question was, what would he try next? The confrontation came sooner than Elena expected. She was at home the next morning, having taken a rare break from the hospital to shower and change clothes, when she heard voices in the hallway outside her apartment. Through the thin walls, she could make out Marcus's smooth tone and another voice she recognized with growing dread, Alexander's, but colder than she had ever heard it. Elena opened her door to find the two men facing each other in the narrow hallway, tension crackling between them like electricity. "Interesting conversation about Elena's past," Marcus was saying with his practiced smile. "I thought you should know the kind of woman you're really dealing with." "And what kind of woman is that?" Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. Marcus shrugged. "The kind who lies to get what she wants. The kind who sells herself for money. The kind who would rather con a rich man than get an honest job." Elena's heart stopped as she saw Alexander's expression change. Not with anger at Marcus, but with something that looked like doubt. "That's not true," Elena said, stepping into the hallway. "Alexander, whatever he's told you. Is it true that you worked as a stripper?" Alexander asked without looking at her. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "I danced for 3 weeks when I was 18 and pregnant. I told you that yesterday." "Did you tell him you were a high-end escort too?" Marcus interjected smoothly. "Because that's what the club owner told me when I called to verify your employment. Said Elena Rodriguez was very popular with the private clients." "That's a lie," Elena said desperately. "Alexander, I swear to you I only danced. I never—" "She's good at lying," Marcus said to Alexander, as if Elena wasn't standing right there. "She convinced you she was some mysterious art consultant, didn't she? Made you believe she was sophisticated and classy when really she's just another girl from the wrong side of town who'll do anything for money." Elena saw something shut down in Alexander's eyes, and her heart shattered. "Alexander, please. You know who I really am. You've seen me with Sophia. You know I'm not the person he's describing." "Do I?" Alexander asked quietly. "Because it seems like every time I think I know you, Elena, I find out there's something else you've been hiding." "I wasn't hiding anything," Elena said, tears starting to fall. "I told you about the dancing yesterday. I've never done anything else, I swear." "Can you prove that?" Marcus asked with false concern. "Because I have documentation that says otherwise. Phone records, financial transactions, testimonials from clients." "You're lying," Elena said, but even as she said it, she could see that Alexander was beginning to believe Marcus's version of events. Elena, Alexander said slowly, 3 months ago you answered an ad to be a fake girlfriend for money. You lied about your name, your background, your entire life. You took $50,000 to pretend to care about me. Now I find out you've worked as a dancer and possibly more, and you expect me to believe that's where the deception ends. Elena felt the world tilting around her. The money didn't matter once I got to know you. What we have is real, Alexander. You know it's real. What I know, Alexander said, his voice getting colder, is that I've been played by an expert. Someone who knew exactly what to say and do to make me fall for her. Someone who probably saw me as the perfect mark, lonely, wealthy, desperate enough for genuine connection that I'd believe whatever story you told me. That's not true. Elena cried. I love you. I fell in love with you, that's why I told you the truth about Sophia, that's why I ended our contract. You told me the truth because you got caught, Alexander said. If I hadn't hired that private investigator, would you ever have told me about your daughter? About your real name? About any of it? Elena opened her mouth to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. Because he was right, she had only told him the truth when she was forced to. I see, Alexander said quietly. That's what I thought. Marcus was watching this exchange with obvious satisfaction, like a predator who had successfully separated his prey from the herd. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Marcus said to Alexander with false sympathy. Elena's always been good at making people believe what she wants them to believe. It's a survival skill when you grow up the way she did. Shut up, Elena said desperately. Alexander, please don't listen to him. Yes, I lied at the beginning, but everything changed when I fell in love with you. Everything we've shared these past few weeks, everything with Sophia, that's all real. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, and Elena saw the exact moment when he made his decision. His expression went completely blank, the mask of the successful businessman sliding back into place. I think it's best if we end this arrangement, he said formally. I'll continue to cover Sophia's medical expenses, of course. She's an innocent child who deserves the best care possible. But as for us... He trailed off. As for us what? Elena whispered. There is no us, Elena. There never really was there? Just another performance, another con job. Elena felt something die inside her chest. Alexander, you don't mean that. You can't believe I've been lying to you about how I feel. What I believe, Alexander said, his gray eyes like ice, is that I don't know you at all. And I'm beginning to think I never did. He turned to walk away and Elena grabbed his arm desperately. Please don't do this. Please don't throw away what we have because of something that happened 8 years ago when I was scared and alone. Alexander looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. Elena, what we had was built on lies from the very beginning. Maybe some of your feelings became real, but that doesn't change the foundation. I can't build a relationship with someone I don't trust. You can trust me, Elena said desperately. I'm telling you the truth now. About everything. Are you? Alexander asked. Because I'm starting to wonder what else you haven't told me. What other secrets are you hiding? What other parts of your past are going to surface when I least expect them? Elena felt the last of her hope crumbling. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? What about what you said about not going anywhere, about facing things together? That was before I realized how much you were still hiding from me, Alexander said. Elena, I told you that trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. I should have listened to my own advice. Alexander pulled his arm free from her grasp and walked toward the elevator without looking back. Elena stood in the hallway watching the man she loved disappear from her life, while Marcus stood beside her with a satisfied smile. Well, that went better than I expected, Marcus said cheerfully. Rich boys hate being played for fools. Tends to make them paranoid about everyone's motives. Elena turned on him with fury she didn't know she possessed. You destroyed everything. You ruined the best thing that ever happened to me and Sophia. I told the truth, Marcus said with a shrug. Not my fault your boyfriend couldn't handle it. You lied. Elena screamed. I never worked as an escort. I never did anything but dance and you know it. Marcus's smile turned cruel. Can you prove that? Because I can produce a lot of evidence that says otherwise. Fake evidence, sure, but very convincing. Enough to make anyone doubt your version of events. Elena stared at him in horror. You planned this. You came here planning to destroy my relationship. I came here for money, Marcus corrected. But when I saw how much your rich boyfriend trusted you, I realized there was more than one way to get what I wanted. See, Elena, now that you're single again, you're going to need that $50,000 even more. Because without Alexander Reed's support, How are you going to pay for Sophia's ongoing medical care? Elena felt the walls closing in around her. Marcus was right. Without Alexander, she couldn't afford Sophia's follow-up appointments, her medications, the physical therapy she needed. And now, with her relationship destroyed and her reputation ruined, she couldn't even go back to their original arrangement. What do you want? Elena asked quietly. Same thing I wanted before. $50,000. Consider it back pay for all those years I wasn't around to help with Sophia. And if I don't pay? Marcus smiled. Then I make sure everyone in San Francisco knows exactly what kind of woman Elena Rodriguez really is. The newspapers would love a story about how a former stripper conned one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Think that would help or hurt your employment prospects? Elena closed her eyes, feeling trapped and defeated. She had fought so hard to build a better life for herself and Sophia, and now it was all crashing down around her because of choices she had made when she was barely an adult. I need time to get the money together, she said finally. You have until tomorrow night, Marcus said. After that I start making phone calls. Marcus walked away whistling, leaving Elena standing alone in the hallway of her apartment building, her world in ruins around her. She had lost Alexander possibly forever. Her reputation was destroyed. And now she was being blackmailed by the father who had abandoned Sophia when she needed him most. Elena sank onto the stairs, finally allowing herself to cry for everything she had lost. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't know how to fix things. She didn't know how to protect Sophia from the consequences of her own past. And worst of all, she didn't know how to live without the man she had fallen in love with, even though he now believed the worst possible things about her. The contract that had brought them together was over. The love they had found was destroyed. All Elena had left was the truth, and apparently that wasn't enough. Alexander spent 3 days drowning himself in work, trying to forget the look in Elena's eyes when he walked away from her. He held back-to-back meetings, reviewed contracts until his vision blurred, and stayed at the office until well past midnight. But no matter how busy he kept himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. It was Margaret Chin who finally forced him to confront the truth. You look like hell, Margaret said, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. When's the last time you slept? I'm fine, Alexander replied, not looking up from the contract he was reviewing for the third time. No, you're not. You're miserable and it's affecting your judgment. I've seen you make more mistakes in the past 3 days than you've made in the past 3 years. Alexander finally looked up, noting the concern in Margaret's weathered face. It's nothing I can't handle. This is about Elena, isn't it? Margaret asked gently. About whatever happened between you two? Alexander's jaw tightened. There's nothing between us. There never really was. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Really? Because the Alexander I no doesn't usually pay for experimental heart surgery for children he's never met. And he certainly doesn't look like his world has ended when a business arrangement comes to a natural conclusion. It wasn't a business arrangement, Alexander said before he could stop himself. No, Margaret agreed, it wasn't. Was love. So what happened? Alexander leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally overwhelming his stubborn pride. She lied to me, Margaret. About everything. Her name, her background, her past. And when I thought we were finally being honest with each other, I found out there were still things she was hiding. What kind of things? Alexander hesitated, then found himself telling Margaret everything, about Elena's real identity, about Marcus's accusations, about the dancing and the possibility that Elena had been an escort. Margaret listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just letting him talk. When he finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Alexander, she said finally, do you remember what I told you about Elena at that first charity gala? About how she seemed different from your usual companions. Alexander nodded. I said she seemed more genuine. Less interested in your bank account than in your conversation. Do you still believe that was true? I don't know what I believe anymore, Alexander admitted. Then let me ask you this, in all the time you spent with Elena, did she ever ask you for money beyond your original arrangement? Did she ever push for expensive gifts or try to access your accounts? Alexander frowned, thinking back through their weeks together. No. She actually seemed uncomfortable when I spent money on her. And when you found out about Sophia, did Elena ask you to pay for the surgery? Or did you offer? I offered, Alexander said slowly. She tried to refuse, actually. Said she couldn't pay me back. Margaret smiled. Doesn't sound like the behavior of a gold digger to me. But she still lied, Alexander said stubbornly. About her past, about who she was. She lied about working as a dancer for 3 weeks when she was 18 and desperate to pay for prenatal care? Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. Alexander, that's not deception. That's survival. Alexander was quiet, Margaret's words hitting him harder than he wanted to admit. You know, Margaret continued, I worked my way through college as a cocktail waitress in some pretty questionable establishments. Should I have told my husband about that before we married? Should every mistake we make as teenagers define us for the rest of our lives? It's not the same thing, Alexander said weakly. Isn't it? Or are you just looking for an excuse to run away before Elena can hurt you the way Jennifer did? Alexander's head snapped up at the mention of his ex-fiancée. This has nothing to do with Jennifer. Doesn't it? Jennifer was sophisticated, came from the right family, said all the right things. And she still betrayed you when someone richer came along. Elena is everything Jennifer wasn't: genuine, hardworking, devoted to the people she loves. But you're throwing her away because she's not perfect. Alexander stared at Margaret, feeling like she had just punched him in the stomach. Because she was right. He was running away not because Elena had really betrayed him, but because he was terrified of being hurt again. Even if you're right, Alexander said quietly, it might be too late. The things Marcus said, the way I reacted. I don't think Elena will ever forgive me. Margaret smiled. There's only one way to find out. Alexander looked out his office window at the city below, thinking about Elena and Sophia and the love he had thrown away out of fear and pride. Maybe it was too late. Maybe Elena would never trust him again after the way he had walked away from her. But Margaret was right about one thing, he would never know unless he tried. I need to make a phone call, Alexander said, reaching for his phone. The first call was to his private investigator. I need you to investigate Marcus Webb, Alexander said. Everything, his background, his finances, any criminal history. And I need you to verify his claims about Elena Rodriguez's employment history 8 years ago. The second call was to his lawyer. I may need you to file harassment charges against someone, Alexander said, and possibly prepare a restraining order. The third call was to Dr. Chen at the hospital. How is Sophia doing? Alexander asked. And more importantly, how is Elena? Dr. Chen's voice was concerned. Sophia is recovering beautifully. But Elena, she's struggling. She seems distracted and worried about something. She's asked several times about payment arrangements for Sophia's ongoing care. Alexander's heart clenched. Elena was worried about money again, probably because she thought he was going to withdraw his financial support along with his emotional support. Dr. Chen, I want to make something very clear, Alexander said. Sophia's medical care is my responsibility for as long as she needs it. Elena should never have to worry about payment. If she asks again, please refer her directly to me. Of course. Alexander, if you don't mind me asking, is everything all right between you and Elena? Alexander closed his eyes. I hope it will be. His private investigator called back 2 hours later with information that made Alexander's blood boil. Marcus Webb has a criminal record, the investigator reported. Fraud, identity theft, blackmail. He's been in and out of prison for the past 8 years. And about Elena Rodriguez, I contacted the club where she worked. The owner confirmed she was only employed for 3 weeks as a dancer, nothing more. He also said Marcus Webb called him yesterday offering money for false testimony about Elena's activities. Alexander hung up the phone feeling sick with guilt and anger. Elena had been telling the truth, and he had chosen to believe a criminal over the woman he loved. Marcus had fabricated evidence and played on Alexander's insecurities, and Alexander had fallen for it completely. By the time Alexander arrived at Elena's apartment building that evening, he had a plan. But first he needed to apologize for being the biggest fool in San Francisco. Elena answered her door looking exhausted and defeated. Her eyes were red from crying, and she had lost weight in just the 3 days since he had last seen her. Alexander, she said quietly, what are you doing here? I came to apologize, Alexander said, and to tell you that I know the truth about Marcus. Elena's expression didn't change. Which truth would that be? That he's a criminal who has been lying about you to extort money. That you never worked as anything but a dancer and only for 3 weeks. That everything he told me was fabricated. Elena was quiet for a long moment. How do you know? I had him investigated. I should have done that from the beginning instead of taking the word of a stranger over yours. Elena stepped back, allowing Alexander into her tiny apartment. It looked different somehow, emptier, sadder, as if all the hope had been drained out of it. Where's Sophia? Alexander asked. At Carmen's. I didn't want her to see me upset. Elena sat down heavily on the couch. Alexander, even if Marcus was lying about some things, it doesn't change the fact that I did work at that club. It doesn't change the fact that I lied to you for months. Alexander sat down beside her, careful to maintain some distance. Elena, I don't care that you danced at a club when you were 18 and desperate. I care that I was so quick to believe the worst about you when I should have trusted what I knew about your character. Elena looked at him with tired eyes. What you knew about my character? Alexander, you didn't know anything about my character. I was playing a role for you, remember? Elena Martinez, the sophisticated art consultant with no complications. That's not true, Alexander said firmly. Elena Martinez might have been fake, but the woman who read to her daughter every night was real. The woman who remembered my staff's names and asked about their families was real. The woman who fell asleep in a hospital chair because she refused to leave Sophia's side was real. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to tell you everything from the beginning. But I was so scared that if you knew who I really was, you'd decide I wasn't worth the trouble. Elena, look at me, Alexander said, waiting until she met his eyes. You are worth everything. You are worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth loving completely and without reservation. I'm sorry it took me 3 miserable days to remember that. Elena stared at him, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. Alexander, we can't just pretend the past few days didn't happen. You walked away from me. You believed Marcus over me. How do I know you won't do it again the next time someone says something about my past? Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out a legal document. Because Marcus Webb is never going to bother you again. This is a restraining order, and my lawyer is filing criminal charges against him for extortion and harassment. If he comes within 100 feet of you or Sophia, he's going to prison. Elena took the document with shaking hands. You did this for me? I did this for us, Alexander corrected. Elena, I know I hurt you. I know I handled everything wrong. But if you'll give me another chance, I promise I'll never doubt you again. Elena was quiet for a long time, and Alexander felt his heart breaking as he waited for her response. I love you, Elena said finally. But I don't know if love is enough anymore. Alexander, you saw the worst in me so easily. How do I trust that you won't do it again? Alexander had been prepared for this question, and he knew his answer would determine their future. Because I'm going to prove it to you every single day for the rest of our lives, he said simply. Elena Rodriguez, will you marry me? Elena's eyes went wide with shock. What? Alexander slid off the couch and onto one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. I'm asking you to marry me. Not Elena Martinez, the fake art consultant. Elena Rodriguez, the amazing mother who works 3 jobs and makes terrible coffee and reads romance novels because she believes in happy endings. Elena stared at the ring, then at Alexander's face. Alexander, you can't be serious. 3 days ago you thought I was a con artist. 3 days ago I was an idiot, Alexander said. Elena, I want to marry you because you're brave and kind and strong. I want to marry you because you taught me what real love looks like. I want to marry you because I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the trust you placed in me. Elena was crying now, tears streaming down her face. What about your reputation? Your business associates? What will they think when they find out you're marrying a hotel maid from Oakland? They'll think I'm the luckiest man alive, Alexander said firmly. Elena, I don't care what anyone else thinks. I care about you and Sophia and the family we could build together. Elena looked down at the ring, a beautiful but simple solitaire that somehow perfectly captured who she was, elegant but not flashy, valuable but not ostentatious. What about Sophia? Elena asked quietly. Are you ready to be her stepfather? To go to school plays and help with homework and deal with a recovering child who's going to need a lot of attention? Alexander smiled. Elena, I've been looking forward to that since the day I met her. Sophia is part of you, which means she's part of my heart too. Elena closed her eyes and Alexander held his breath, waiting for her answer. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Elena opened her eyes and smiled through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. But only if you promise that we'll always tell each other the truth from now on, no matter how hard it is. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, pouring all of his love and regret and hope into that single moment. I promise, he said against her lips. Elena Rodriguez, I promise to love you and trust you and choose you every single day for the rest of my life. Elena kissed him back, and Alexander tasted salt from her tears and sweetness from her forgiveness. They held each other tight, both of them crying and laughing and overwhelmed by the second chance they had almost thrown away. I love you too, Elena whispered. All of you. The Billionaire and the Man Who Sits on Hospital Floors Reading Astronomy Books to Little Girls. Alexander pulled back to look at her face, memorizing this moment when everything became right. Again. So what happens now? Elena smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her in days. Now we go get our daughter and tell her she's getting a new daddy. And then we start planning the rest of our lives. Our daughter, Alexander repeated, loving the sound of it. Our daughter, Elena confirmed. Alexander, are you ready for this? Really ready? Because loving us means accepting that life is going to be messy and complicated and nothing like those perfect business dinners. Alexander thought about the long road ahead, marriage, parenthood, building a life with a woman who had taught him that love was worth every risk and every sacrifice. Elena, he said, I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it until I met you. They kissed again, sealing a promise that had nothing to do with contracts or arrangements and everything to do with choosing each other completely. Outside Elena's window, the sun was setting over Oakland, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed to promise better days ahead. In 6 months, Elena and Alexander would be married in a small ceremony at the hospital where Sophia had her surgery, surrounded by the people who had become their family. Carmen would be Elena's maid of honor, and Sophia would be the flower girl, finally healthy enough to skip down the aisle without getting tired. Dr. Chen would perform the ceremony, and Margaret would give Elena away. Marcus would be in prison, and Elena would never have to worry about money or medical bills or providing for her daughter again. But more importantly, Elena and Alexander would have learned that real love, the kind that survives lies and misunderstandings and second chances, is built on a foundation of truth, trust, and the courage to choose each other even when it's scary. As they sat together on Elena's couch, planning their future and marveling at the ring on her finger, both of them knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The contract that had brought them together was long forgotten, replaced by something infinitely more valuable, a love that was real, tested, and strong enough to last forever. Thank you, Elena whispered. For what? For seeing past all my lies to the truth underneath. For fighting for us when I was too scared to fight for myself. Alexander kissed her forehead gently. Thank you for teaching me that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth believing in even when they seem impossible. Elena smiled and settled into his arms, feeling truly safe for the first time in her adult life. She had started this journey as a desperate single mother willing to lie for money. She was ending it as a woman who had found real love with a man who accepted every part of her story. It wasn't the ending she had planned, but it was better than any romance novel she had ever read. Because this happy ending was real, and it was theirs, and it was just the beginning of the life they would build together.